Have you ever noticed that the moment something becomes something you have to do, it suddenly becomes something you don't want to do? The same hobby you once looked forward to starts feeling like work. The project that used to pull you out of bed becomes another task waiting on your to-do list. Even things you genuinely love, reading, exercising, playing music, spending time with people you care about, can begin carrying this strange heaviness, as though someone quietly added weight while you weren't looking. It's confusing, because you know you still care. You haven't decided to stop loving these things. If anything, you probably care more than ever. So why does showing up suddenly feel so difficult? Most of us answer that question by blaming ourselves. Maybe I've become lazy. Maybe I've lost my passion. Maybe this is just what adulthood feels like. Those explanations feel believable. They're also usually wrong, because if you look closely, the activity itself hasn't changed. That guitar leaning against the wall? It's the same guitar you couldn't wait to play a few years ago. The notebook sitting on your desk hasn't become heavier. Your running shoes still weigh exactly what they did the day you bought them. Even the people you enjoy being around haven't suddenly become different. Yet your experience of all those things has changed, which means the real change probably didn't happen outside you. It happened somewhere inside the relationship between you and the activity. At first, there was almost no pressure. You played because playing was fun. You wrote because ideas kept spilling onto the page. And you ran because movement itself felt freeing. The activity didn't have to justify itself. It didn't have to lead anywhere. It simply existed. Then, slowly, almost quietly, something else entered the picture. Expectations, deadlines, progress, comparison, performance. Maybe you started sharing your work online. Maybe people began expecting results. Or maybe you started expecting them from yourself. Without realizing it, want to slowly became have to. It became an obligation. And obligation is emotionally expensive because it carries consequences. I should do this, or I'll fall behind. I should finish this, or I'm wasting my potential. I have to keep improving, or people will think I'm not good enough. The activity is no longer just the activity. It's now tied to what might happen if you don't do it. And that's critical, because your brain doesn't respond only to events. It responds to what those events mean. An activity that once represented curiosity, freedom, or enjoyment can gradually become associated with pressure, evaluation, uncertainty, and the possibility of failure. Once that shift happens, different brain systems begin responding to it. One of those brain systems is the amygdala, a small, almond-shaped region deep inside the brain that serves as your emotional alarm system. Its job is to constantly scan your environment for anything that might threaten your well-being. Thousands of years ago, that meant predators, dangerous weather, or hostile people. Today, many of the threats it responds to are psychological instead, like the fear of failing, the fear of disappointing yourself, the fear of not living up to your own expectations, even the pressure of caring deeply about something. To your conscious mind, those may not seem dangerous, but to the amygdala, they can still signal, be careful. And the more emotional weight an activity carries, the more likely the amygdala is to interpret it as something that deserves caution rather than curiosity. When that happens, it sends a signal to the brain's stress pathway, and that pathway activates the body's stress response, sending signals throughout the brain and body. Those stress signals make it harder for another brain region, the prefrontal cortex, to do its job. The prefrontal cortex sits just behind your forehead. It's responsible for planning, reasoning through problems, focusing attention, making decisions, exercising self-control, and keeping your long-term goals in mind. It's the part of the brain that helps you say, "This feels difficult, but it'll be worth it." But when the brain is busy responding to a perceived threat, the prefrontal cortex has a much harder time doing what it does best. So staying focused becomes more difficult, thinking clearly requires more effort, and even beginning a task can feel surprisingly hard. At the same time, motivation begins to shift. Dopamine, a neurotransmitter that plays a central role in motivation, learning, and anticipating rewards, helps the brain decide what feels worth the effort. When an activity has become associated with pressure, stress, and the possibility of failure, your brain becomes less willing to invest energy in it. Meanwhile, easier alternatives, checking your phone, watching a video, replying to messages, or tidying the room, offer quicker and more certain rewards with far less emotional risk. Suddenly, the easier option doesn't just seem more appealing, it genuinely feels easier. And that's the trap. You don't stop because you've become lazy. You stop because your brain has quietly learned to associate something you once loved with emotional cost. Then, the moment you choose the easier alternative, you experience something powerful. Relief. That relief feels good because the stress drops. And every time that happens, your brain learns the same lesson. Avoid the activity. Feel better. Repeat. That's how something you once couldn't wait to do can slowly begin feeling like a chore. Not because you've lost your passion, but because the activity gradually became associated with pressure instead of curiosity. Then your brain responded to that new meaning. And yet, you still care. Deep down, you know that. That's why the guilt arrives so quickly. You find yourself scrolling, watching another video, or wandering into another unnecessary task. And somewhere in the background, there's that quiet voice. I should be doing it. That voice exists for one simple reason. You haven't stopped caring. If you truly didn't care anymore, there would be no guilt, no disappointment, and no frustration. You would simply move on. The guilt hurts precisely because the love is still there. What's changed isn't your passion. It's your relationship with the activity that changed. The good news is that relationships can change, which means this one can too. So where do you begin? Not by trying to become the energetic version of yourself you were 5 years ago. That person doesn't exist anymore, and neither do the circumstances they lived in. The activity isn't asking you to become your old self again. It's simply inviting you to meet it as the person you are today. Maybe a little more tired, maybe carrying more responsibilities, maybe a little more afraid of failing, but still capable of being curious. So start by lowering the emotional temperature. Tell yourself, this doesn't have to be impressive. It doesn't even have to be good. I'm just going to spend a few minutes with it. No audience, no deadline, no expectation that this has to become something meaningful. Why? Because that's how you begin changing what the activity means. Right now, your brain expects pressure, it expects judgment, it expects emotional cost. But every time you approach the activity with less pressure than it anticipated, you give your brain a different experience. Do that often enough, and the expectation slowly begins to change. Instead of expecting stress, the brain begins expecting something manageable, something safe, something it knows it can handle. That's important because the anticipation is often harder than the activity itself. Think about how many times you've spent an hour avoiding something, only to finally begin it and realize that wasn't nearly as bad as I imagined. The difficulty was never entirely in the task. Much of it existed in what your brain expected the task to feel like. And expectations can be rewritten also by experiencing something different. Maybe you write something no one else will read. Maybe you play the guitar without trying to improve. Maybe you go for a run without tracking your pace. Or maybe you cook simply because you feel like cooking, not because it needs to become proof that you're productive. Notice what all those examples have in common. You're not changing the activity. You're changing the meaning attached to it. You're separating it from performance and reconnecting it with the reason you loved it in the first place.